Well, big thanks to Kyle for organizing this, and welcome everyone to the Great Expectations Community Show and Tell Day. I'm James Campbell. I'm the CTO at Superconductive and was one of the original people lucky enough to get to work on Great Expectations. But as we're going to be talking about today, it's really exciting that there is so much community involvement and engagement, which is exactly what we're hoping for with this project. In fact, one of the things I'm most excited about is the fact that we're going to be hopefully continuing to invest a lot in making that easier and easier to do and supporting people in that engagement. So that's what we really want to highlight today is successes. We've got three presenters who are going to, or three sets of presenters who are going to talk about their work and experience with Great Expectations. After each one, we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers directly to those presenters. So what we'll do at that point is just allow you to unmute yourself if you'd like during that question and answer period, but you can also feel free to enter a question in chat. Feel free to keep your video on or off. You know, it's nice to get to put faces to names for community as we get to know each other better. So that would of course be welcome. Are there any questions? Well, I should say, if there are questions, you know, Kyle will be taking care of moderation or letting people in. So please feel free to hit him as needed in the chat. With that as our introduction, I'd like to pass off to Madelon and Joost, who will be describing their contribution first.
Yeah, thanks. Madelon, so I just share the screen?
Yeah, sure.
So can everybody see it?
Yes.
Yep, I got it.
Awesome. Yeah, so well, thanks for the invite, all. Yeah, I think it would be nice to just start off with a little bit of introduction of our team and what we do within Heineken and how we use it and our current challenges and all the stuff that we've been working on. It's we're really happy to use all of it. So so we are Heineken Global. So we sit in Amsterdam, and then there's around 80 operating companies, which means that like in Heineken USA or Brazil or whatever would have its own operating company, and it's a federated system. So why that's important you'll see a bit later. But for now, it's good to understand that we have like a lot of operating companies, and each one has different challenges and data sets. It also means that there's different skills in each operating company. So for example, one team could be quite big in terms of data science. So you'd have like a couple of data science, maybe an engineer there. But it could also be just one data analyst that has to do the analytics. Basically, our team is to create tools and also to set sort of guidelines and be a center of excellence for all the other operating companies. And that could literally be for all the functions. So it's finance, supply chain, procurement, you name it. And we have some project with one of the functions running, which makes it really cool, but also makes it quite hard because you constantly have to understand all the expert knowledge of all the data. And then basically what we do is collect the needs, understand the business questions, come up with some sort of tool or machine learning model, or sometimes just dashboards, whatever it is. This could be like predictive or descriptive. And then we roll that out to all the opcos that are involved. And so we discovered it last year. I think my first intro was with James then. Then we've done a couple of experiments, which turned out really great. then COVID hit, and to be honest, then it then a couple of those projects were killed. But now currently we are back on track, and actually we are implementing it in our sort of global landscape as well. We didn't have enough info on that, so we're not going to get into that, but I think it's good to know that Great Expectations really has some traction within the company, and we're really excited about it. So we've hosted a workshop as well, me, Madelon, and another colleague of ours at PyData here. Also got really good feedback from that. So you just see that there's a lot of people working with it. And so we are as we are also trying to mature more of these tools that I just showed, we're also trying to mature the data quality checking. And so that's why we are integrating Great Expectations into that. And then I think Madelon is gonna tell you a little bit about the project that she's been working on. That's more specific to what we're doing.
Yeah, so can you keep on the slides?
Yeah.
And I will talk through it. Okay, sure. So I've been working on one of those products that Joost has just described, and I'm a data scientist within Heineken, and I focus on commerce applications, basically. So one of those use cases that we had is that we at Heineken invest a lot of money, of course, in advertising. But advertising comes with many uncertainties. So every operating company, every country needs to determine which campaigns work well, what to invest in. So should we invest in, for example, a Facebook campaign or a TV commercial? And this can be very different from all countries, basically. So we wanted to make a tool, basically, that kind of facilitates this process and facilitates analysis where each operating company can do the analysis itself. If we go then to the next slide, so what this currently looks like, we've been building a prototype for it. So we basically provide a model and a whole pre-processing pipeline, etc., that is based on a data template. So every operating company collects the data, and that data can come from multiple different sources. Every country has its own data providers, and we need to make sure from the tool that the data is pre-processed in the proper format. So we need to also have this template to be really well checked on certain expectations, we now call it. So basically the user starts with uploading some data file to the tool, and then we use Great Expectations to check these data files against a certain set of expectations. And then the whole pipeline continues running. So so we also provide the feedback to the user. So you see this link back to the user after the insights that they get at the end of the process, but also after the first data quality check. So there they can simply upload some file where they can really check, okay, how well was my data formatted, and can I now use the tool, and it gives this feedback as I think it was intended as well. So that's basically how it is integrated in the tool. So if we now go to the next slide. So for this prototype, what I needed is to be able to iterate quickly over the expectations that we have, because at the start of this product, we didn't know for sure what typical expectations we could have. But in the long term, I also want to have a maintainable configuration of these expectations. And I wanted to be able to easily integrate custom expectations as well. So because it's really, yeah, domain dependent also what we expect, of course. So currently, how it is really implemented in a very basic format at the moment, also because it's like a prototype, as we said. So the user uploads an Excel file with all the data in it, and then the validation is triggered. And currently, we just read this Excel file into a data frame, and we use the API to add all these expectations to the data frame, and yeah, that's it basically. And then we validate this data frame. And in the end, the user can download then the JSON output that we get from Great Expectations. It's pretty in a basic implementation without using the context and the expectation suite and also the rendering abilities, but that's definitely on the roadmap for a next stage, basically. So for Heineken, I think Great Expectations has provided already a lot of value, mainly because as Joost already explained, we make a lot of tools for different use cases, and every tool had different ways of checking the same thing. So now we have one standardized way of implementing those data checks, and it also moves away a lot of the code that is needed for it, and a lot of testing. So we really make use of that, of that quality. And I also really like that creating custom expectations is relatively easy at the moment. And for us, it's just a great value for apps that rely on manually created data files. So I think this is the main advantages that we see for Heineken. And Joost will also tell you some of the challenges that we faced while building these solutions.
Yeah, so I think one thing that we were struggling with a little bit in the beginning was to understand all the different concepts. So that was one of the hardest, sort of like it's not immediately like we would hit the ground running once we, like a new data scientist would start, because they have to understand like what is like a data context or a data asset. All these different concepts are a bit like, once you grasp them, they're really nice, but those were some of the challenges that we had in the beginning. Also, the documentation, I think, especially like last year for us, it was a lot of reverse engineering as well, which obviously makes sense with something that's just been built from the ground up so quickly. But sometimes we'd had to do a lot of code checking there, which is also a lot of fun. But that was definitely one of the big challenges. And maybe it's interesting. We wanted this to share because this is sort of our roadmap for next year, and also to share like what our idea was, but be really happy to get input from that as well. So currently what we are working on, this is very simplified, but we were looking at something where we could have like a super easy way of sharing these schemas, and then also having just an API somewhere where in our data pipelines we could just send a CSV file, or at least a sample of a CSV file or whatever data. Doesn't have to be a CSV file, of course, and combined with this YAML or whatever config file, and that you would just get back an validation report. And so far, we haven't really been able to do this easily. So this is sort of one thing that we were kind of missing, because in like a data pipeline, it would be so nice if you could just, in one of the steps, send it to an API and get either a green or a red flag back and let it continue or not. Because that's obviously the biggest challenge when users upload their data. That's why we have the whole expectations. It breaks. So currently we have just a lot of these manual uploads, which often break our pipelines. And this is the number one thing that we are trying to solve. Because obviously in a perfect world, we wouldn't have users upload their own data. We just get it straight from the source system. But as I said, in the real world, Heineken has so many different operating companies, each with their own infrastructure. So we still have to work with this structure sometimes. And this could be a great solution for us. I think that's most of it. But yeah, let me first emphasize that we are really happy with it, and I think more and more teams are using it as well. So there's a lot of traction there, which is really cool. Yeah, that's it. And again,
Thank
thanks
you.
for having us.
Thank you so much, Madeline and Joost. That's a fantastic overview. It's really fun to see how other people deploy great expectations. For me, I think probably for everyone here, which is why this is such a good venue. Let's open it up for questions right away. So if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to type into the chat. Also, if you'd like to unmute yourself, I think you should now be able to unmute yourself, and you can ask the question directly as well.
Yeah, I'll leave the presentation open. Maybe we can use it as a reference for a question. How long did it take to implement? So, to be honest, the first experiments, not that long. Like, it was quite easy in the beginning to, yeah, once you, like I told you, like we had the concepts down, it was super easy to just set up our, yeah, just have our config files in our Git, and we would hack away. I think the challenge came when we actually wanted to have it in our sort of production line, and that's where the most of the challenges came from. I think in the end, yeah, so the first thing was maybe within a week or two, but the whole thing to have it like properly running like Madelon, I'm gonna say 2 months maybe. Not fully working on that, but it took about 2 months before we're in the current status. Let me see. Yeah, maybe Madelon, you can take that one from Max.
Let's see. Max's question is, I'm curious about how the team is orchestrating GE with other pieces of their data app like model building. Good question. Let's see if I understand correctly. So the idea of this is that Great Expectations really is like a wall before the whole process can continue. So we really make sure that the data is right before the rest of the pipeline is run, basically. I don't know if that's the question that you were after, or do I not understand it well enough? Right. No. So the current app that I've been building is just an application that users log into, and then they upload their file, and then the rest of the process they can basically click through. So there's no scheduling or something like that. So there's really, they have to first make sure that the data is right with an interactive process, basically going back and forth, running, like uploading their data multiple times, and then when it's correct, they will get this message, and then they continue with the rest of the process, basically. So there's no.
And then to add to that, within the sort of new production system, we're running that on Azure. So that's within Data Factory that we're implementing it. Were there any data sources that were particularly challenging? Yeah, I think one of them I can think of is that we had multi-column checks that we had to do. So I think we had to write our own expectation for that. It was doable, but I think that was quite a tricky one. Yeah, but still cool that that you're able to do it. Any other questions?
Well, I'm curious, you mentioned just now this multi-column expectation. Are there any other custom expectations that you authored that you'd be interested in sharing with the group?
Yeah, I think one of the other engineers had to. I don't know by heart, and I could go into the repo now, but I don't think I have the time for that. But I think in total we have a couple. So the multi-column value was one. I'm trying to think what the other two were. I have to get back to you on that. Sorry.
Yeah, I've implemented some custom expectations as well. And one thing that I had issues with, which made me, rewrite my whole data template at all, was making expectations for multi-level indexes. At some point, I got stuck somewhere, and I thought, okay, let's just go with a flat level, one level column index. But happy to share those custom expectations with the team. But I don't know if they're really useful for others, but who knows?
Thanks for sharing that. One of the things that we are most excited about, or that I'm especially excited about, is some changes that we're introducing that will make it easier to implement new custom expectations by really bringing together all of the logic for the expectation and including in that rendering capability for data docs and so forth. So I'm really excited about that. We're really hopeful that it's going to make the process of writing custom expectations much more accessible and easy to share across the team.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, we got a couple other questions here, or one more question it looks like just popped in.
Just in case, thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that, it's such a standard answer, but I think it really depends on the whole situation. For us, we didn't have any challenges on that because the number of requests weren't that big yet. It's definitely something that we have to take into account. But yeah, like scalable machine learning microservice, I mean, why not? As long as the API is able to handle the incoming request, and sure. Again, it's so hard to sort of answer because it depends on so many different factors. So we don't have any streaming APIs currently built in. Would be really cool. I think for us the data is usually not that much in a streaming fashion. So it's usually like sales data coming in from the source systems, which is daily or weekly. So streaming doesn't really make sense for that. It might if we get into other data. So you saw the weather API, like that's definitely one where we are picking up more and more data and storing that. So there it could be really cool. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you again, both Madelon and Joost. This has been a really fantastic discussion. I think we're going to go ahead and switch over now and move on to our next group, singleton presentation. Taylor Miller is going to talk about his work with the GitHub Action.
All right. Share my screen here. So we are just so excited about this partnership. Hamel is here with us. He reached out to us from the GitHub team and said, hey, we would love to build an action for grid expectations. Okay, which screen do you see? Do you see my browser and a terminal?
Yep. Yeah, browser.
Okay, great. So he's reached out and said, hey, we'd love to build a GitHub Actions for grid expectations. Those of you that are not familiar with oh, my desk has got a mind of its own all of a sudden. I'll stay sitting. Actions are composable workflows. So you can build these individual actions. You can build workflows out of them that have logic in them and switch and so forth. And they run in GitHub right along with your code and so forth. So we are going to demo this today, and this way that these things can become part of your workflow. Now, one of the things that's important to highlight here is that the key application for what you're going to see today is that you're validating changes to your code. So validating your pipeline code, not necessarily your data. Now, you can certainly use this for validating data, but you would want to trigger it differently. So we're going to focus the use case today on validating your pipeline code. So let's dive right in and show you what our simple little pipeline looks like here. All right. I have got a repository. I've got my Great Expectations folder, which you are all familiar with. And if not, we've got lots of tutorials, so we can show you that. Here's my pipeline. This is a very simple toy pipeline. It uses the New York City taxi data. We do some SQL transformations and so forth. So let's go ahead and make a PR here. Let's make a branch. Let's call it, we're going to do some dashboarding. The executive wants something on the dashboard, so we'll dashboard enhancements. Great, we've got a new branch, and we will do some SQL changes, nothing major. Let's commit that. Dashboard updates. I'll push this upstream. And let's jump over to our GitHub repo and start a PR going. All right. Of course, I'd be a good engineer and put in a nice description and so forth, but we're going to kick this off. So one thing you might notice off the bat is that we have a check running. PR, Great Expectations validation on pull request. So this is where it gets very exciting. So, oh, I was going to show you the expectations we have in here, just so you can see those. Let's build our docs real quick. And these would have been set up beforehand. Oh, here we go. All right, so the one that we're particularly interested on is our locations demo. So we have it's a small suite, eight expectations, 3 columns. We're looking at some aggregates here. Values must never be null. We have a distribution that we expect to see, some null checks, and then some just basic sanity checks. So we do have some expectations there. Again, Great Expectations, we believe that your pipeline test should live with your pipeline code. So this is all part of the repo. It's all committed. And we have this action running. Okay, let's look at this check in detail. So we jump over here and we can see this action running. So this is a GitHub workflow that's composed of a number of actions. These are the 5 or 6 actions you see here. And the one that we will be talking about in detail is this one near the bottom, run Great Expectations checkpoints. This takes a few minutes to run. So while this is running, I'd like to show you how this is built. Okay, so in your repository, you will have a YAML file that defines your workflows that GitHub runs. You'll see, of course, there's a few things that are important to note. That we're using GitHub secrets, which is a very secure and good way to manage secrets. So this pipeline is running in an RDS instance on AWS. Those secrets are managed through GitHub secrets. So we are running that pipeline as part of this workflow. But let's just look at a couple of these actions. So we clone the repo. We run our pipeline on, in a staging environment. We then do the most exciting part. We run our Great Expectations checkpoint action. And there's lots and lots of details about how to set this up in different ways on the actions repo. But essentially, we're going to specify the checkpoint that we want to run. And if we jump back over here, Great Expectations checkpoint list, we will see we have a few checkpoints. The one that we are running is this locations RDS check, and that runs one of the suites against one of the tables that we're concerned about. So this is how we have configured our Great Expectations action to run. We also have some lovely Netlify integration here that will publish the data docs to Netlify. And then a very slick thing that Hamel put together is the it's almost like a bot. So it'll actually comment on your PR and let you know what's going on. But let's check back in to see how this is running. Okay, we're still in the build process. Okay, starting to cruise now. So it's just run our SQL pipeline, and now it's running our checkpoint. And this should just take a moment. Okay, now we're reading the log output. So we already have a sneak peek that something failed, right? No surprise for a demo. But let's jump back in to the PR when this is completed and see what happens. Okay. So if we now look at our PR, we've got that lovely red X that software engineers are very familiar with, and hopefully data engineers will be in the future as we bring data engineering into a tested workflow. So I've got this check. All right, checks have failed. Let's look at it. And I have a comment from the GitHub Action bot. Failed grid expectations checkpoint. There's the name of my checkpoint. There's the GUID, or the hash for that commit. And we can actually go and look at the validation results here. So this is hosted on Netlify. We'll just take a peek here. Okay, it did fail, 1033. That's the correct one. And okay, let's see. Okay, so first of all, we've got a row count discrepancy. We expected fewer rows than we got. We ended up with 40 something. Again, this is a very tiny toy data set for expediency, but this is interesting. Drop-off location, one of our fields is completely null, or nearly null, 89% null, and the distribution is very fishy. Whenever you see a distribution as a data person that everything is equal, something is fishy, or that's a very automated process. So that tells us that between the row counts and the distribution, we probably screwed up our join. So here we can see, we can go and start debugging. We'd probably engage a teammate if this was more complicated, but we can see like, okay, we've screwed up our join. So what have we seen here? We have seen that we've submitted a PR. Our GitHub Actions has run the pipeline in our staging environment with that specific commit. It's run our checkpoint that we requested. You can run as many as you'd like, but this one is running one. And it's commented on our PR and saying, hey, dude, you messed up your join. And here's how your data looks after you mess that up. So this is just, it's an integration that we are just so excited about because it brings the power of CI/CD to data pipelines. And we have a whole bunch of ideas about how people are going to use this. We envision this in ML pipelines, training pipelines, in any kind of ETL pipeline this would fit. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to cover here. Yeah, so that's a very brief demo of the GitHub Action for Great Expectations. When you want to install this, you can go to this repository, which we'll post in Slack. There's a whole bunch of demos, a bunch of integrations, different ways you can use it. If you'd like, you can set this up on a schedule to check for new data. So there's kind of like a little cron functionality built into GitHub Actions. And just a huge shout out to Hamel if he's online. It was phenomenally pleasurable working with him and the GitHub team. And yeah, open up for questions.
I just want to mention real quick, this is Hamel, that we are really, really excited about this as well at GitHub. And this is actually one of the most exciting things I've seen in a long time as a data scientist from a DevOps perspective. As far as I know, this is the first time I've seen CI/CD for data. A lot of times we see CI/CD for code, to run unit tests. But this is incredibly useful. We're already using this internally also at GitHub. It's incredibly useful. And I've heard from a lot of people that are using GitHub that they're also excited about this. So really hats off to Great Expectations team for creating something that can enable this type of workflow. I just want to mention one more thing. So you might be wondering about your data might be private behind your own firewall or your own, VPN or something like that. You might be wondering how does this work with that? So one thing that GitHub Actions provides you is the ability to run your own self-hosted runners. So, GitHub will host action runners for you in the cloud by default, but you can run your own actions runtime in your own data center or on your bare metal And that can be running in a place that can connect to your data in case you have private data. So I just want to mention that. But excellent demo, by the way. It's really great.
Great. Let's open up to questions.
While people find their unmute buttons, I'll start with the question first. Hamel, you answered where I was going to go first right away with the question about data, and Taylor. Wow, that was really just so concise and great to see all that put together. Both of you mentioned the idea that this could be an important complement to an ML workflow. Do you view the action as primarily useful for testing new data sets that are, where the data is different, or like Taylor in the example that you gave for running checks as you are making potential changes to a pipeline?
Yeah, we envision a lot of uses for this. With the ability to run actions on a schedule, you can use this to monitor your data drift as in those key tables that your models are feeding on. So if you don't have grid expectations embedded in a pipeline, kind of like Heineken is showing us, you can have grid expectations running adjacent to your pipeline and still getting all the value by having it reach into that materialized data on a scheduled or triggered basis, and checking that to make sure you're not about to do some ML atrocities.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's one thing that Taylor and I hacked on for a bit, but we didn't include here because it's actually a separate sort of product, which is, so you might be thinking, hey, not all great expectations failure will happen as a result of a change to pipeline code. Like your data can break regardless of whether or not you're changing your pipeline, which is true. So it is also possible using GitHub Actions to automatically open an issue on a repository if something in your pipeline breaks. That might be something that we show an example of later on, but it's definitely possible, kind of in this very similar fashion to what you see here.
That's really, really exciting to think about how it opens up so many new possibilities for whole collaborative workflows where there's a new part of your system. Do we have any other questions in the group for Taylor or Hamel?
Yeah, just a question, David, somewhere near London. Yeah, I guess so. Following up a bit on that, so I mean, I kind of envisage this, I guess, for us in that you would be doing, let's say we use Airflow for all our kind of data pipelines, so that we would probably be like daily running, suites of great expectations against, say, the previous set of data. So we kind of each day do like a checkpoint, does a distribution of the data the same. So that would kind of be across, a few hundred different tables. That would be kind of our, let's say, the heavy lifting. But then maybe for the GitHub Actions piece, we would then trigger like a sort of a sample, maybe like a sample of those different tables, so that if let's say lots of the teams where we're relying on the data to come from our platform, change schema or change some behavior, we've got, a good chance of catching it at that time. But obviously we don't sit there for hours and hours waiting for the PR to finish. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Yeah, and we've seen in prior projects, we've seen data engineering teams have like data fixtures, some smaller sample of known data that they understand, and have that for their CI test. So that'd be a perfect use case for something like you're describing.
Right. Yeah, because I guess that sort of golden data set would be then, I guess there's pros and cons, isn't there? Because then obviously if the data shape could change and then your golden data is no longer very golden.
Right.
Or you try and have a sample of yesterday's data and do your checkpointing on that. Okay.
Yeah, we view the world as the data engineering world as two kinds of risks. There's pipeline risks and there's kind of data risks. We use GE to mitigate both those types of risks. So yeah, great point.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, great tool. Thank you.
So I'd like to also flag for everyone in your chat, Kyle posted a link to a survey where you can look for or volunteer. We'd love to have additional volunteers for another community show and tell day. So if you're working on another project or have a use case that you'd like to demo to the broader community and show off how you're using Great Expectations, we'd love to have you participate in another one of these in the future. Well, let's go ahead and transition now. For our next show and tell, we have Max Gasner, who's going to talk about his work with Great Expectations integrating with Dagster.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Max Gasner. I work at Elemental, which is the sponsor of Dagster, an open source data orchestrator. And I'm a deep believer in data quality testing, a true believer in data quality testing. So I'd like to, obviously Great Expectations is great for defining suites of data quality tests and running them, but it's not a pipeline execution framework. And so there is this kind of open question: how do you deploy Great Expectations, and how do you get it to play nicely with everything else that's going on in your data application? And that's where I think this integration might be interesting to people. I want to talk a little bit about what Dagster is. Here it is on a list of a bunch of tools: Spark, Airflow, DBT, Prefect, Dagster, Kedro. Those tools kind of are in slightly different domains, and Dagster is a little bit different maybe than some of them. So if you'll bear with me, I want to talk a little bit about what it is, talk a little bit about the programming model so that we all have a common vocabulary, and then we can look at the integration and how that works. So data applications, this is what we all work on. They're graphs of computations that consume and produce data assets. And the graphs are quite often implicit. So you may have, your Great Expectations stuff running in one system. You may have Spark stuff running on some other schedule. You may have a bunch of analysts building reports and stuff. And all those things, the dependencies between those computations and the assets they produce may very well be implicit. So, data applications, they're complex. They're made up of a lot of different tools. A lot of different people work on them, a lot of different teams. They cross environments very naturally because data is used by people in all kinds of different places and comes from all kinds of different places. And as a consequence, not just data quality, but all the other pieces, getting everything to run together, getting it all to work together, it's all very hard to develop. It's all very hard to test, deploy, and operate. And these are software engineering deficits. Obviously, everyone who's on this call believes in testability as like one very important deficit that we're trying to fill in. So this is kind of the framework for our project. So Dagster is three things. It's a programming model, it's a set of tooling built on top of that programming model, and then it's a platform for integrations with tools like Great Expectations. So we call it a data orchestrator, by which we mean sort of a next generation workflow manager. So we view data applications as a graph of computations. So each of these pieces of your data app, Great Expectations suites, the ingest, the processing in Spark or DBT, the report writing, those are all functional computations that can be attached to each other. And viewing them that way lets you isolate external state, which enables testability and a bunch of stuff that I probably don't need to preach to this audience about. The nodes of this graph are computations, the edges are data aware, and the computations produce a stream of structured metadata, which is the basis for tooling. So how do we look at Great Expectations? Well, a fabulous tool for authoring data docs and expectation suites. But what we really want to be able to do is orchestrate Great Expectation suites alongside all kinds of other compute so that you can run the suites immediately after your Spark transformations run, or immediately after whatever you're running in Pandas runs, or immediately after your DBT models that are producing the tables that you want to run data checks run on. We want to be able to display the metadata from all of those heterogeneous tools in one place so that you can monitor your DBT model runtime alongside the data quality indicators. And we want to be able to pass data from the expectation suites downstream so that, for instance, you can trigger Slack alerting when your expectation suites fail or do some kind of post-processing. So briefly want to look at the Dagster programming model so you see how we've slotted Great Expectations in. so like, and it's just a Python model, so you use pip like with any other Python model. The nodes of the graph in Dagster we call solids. These are the functional units of computation. They're just annotated Python functions. We use a decorator syntax, which is really straightforward because you don't have to make very many changes to the body of your Python when you're turning it into a unit in the graph. And they're self-documenting. So there's like all of our, we kind of completely believe in the documentation as code as documentation principles. And so all of the objects in this system are also self-documenting, just like the suites. We inject a context which isolates access to external state. Solids declare what they need from that context, and the resources are injected by the framework. And then they yield a stream of structured events. This is the metadata that makes it possible to build shared tooling on top of the orchestration graph. And basically every meaningful side effect is represented and stored in a kind of permanent asset catalog. Inputs and outputs are typed and meaningful. Solids are also configurable, so we'll see that in a little bit. And they yield meaningful outputs to downstream computations. So those are sort of the basic design principles. And then we use, again, like a very simple Python decorator syntax to mimic function invocation in order to construct these graphs. So we connect solid inputs and outputs by using basically Python function calls. And great. So solids, those are the units of the graph. They isolate their access to external state in an injected context. We string them together into pipelines, and they emit a stream of metadata, which is the basis for tooling. So, okay, what does that tooling look like? We're actually going to see it in a second live, but basically there's a central view of the orchestration graph. So this is all the heterogeneous nodes in the pipeline in one interface. You can execute on the fly, and there are operational views that let you look at your pipeline runs and longitudinally. So what did we do to integrate Great Expectations? The first thing was we wrapped expectation suite execution in a solid so that the execution of an expectation suite can be triggered just like any other compute that you're doing in Spark or DBT or any other tool that you are using in your data platform. That lets us orchestrate it alongside heterogeneous processes, so it can depend on upstream steps succeeding, and it can pass its results as a meaningful output downstream. So the way this is actually implemented is just with a little convenience function, a little solid factory here. We basically just pass it into an you've created an existing expectation suite in Great Expectations, and you pass it a data source name. So that's just the data source that you have in your Great Expectations YAML, and the name of the expectation suite to execute. So let's see what this looks like in reality. So I'm using a very contrived data set, which is just a bunch of baseball salaries. And so we're not going to make any very meaningful assertions about this data set, but I want you to see kind of like what it looks like. So here's a basic expectation suite that makes some assertions about payroll figures. So we want to execute this alongside a bunch of other compute. So here we have sort of just, again, a very trivial and contrived pipeline where we read in the data from some external source. We have some processing that happens on the data, and we run our validation suite in parallel. And then we do some post-processing using the results of the validation suite in the post-processing. And so you can see here this Great Expectations validation solid. It's because it's a pandas suite, and we support kind of all the data sources in Great Expectations, but because this one is a pandas suite, the factory automatically types its input to be a pandas data frame, and then it outputs a dict containing the results. So let's look at what that looks like when we execute it. So I mentioned typed config. Here you can see that we can swap in a different data context if that's desirable. And obviously, we're also reading in this data from some configurable place. So, but this lets you, run the same suite on test data, on your production data, using a data context that is slightly different from your existing data context. So if you want to swap something out to see what a change in your expectation suite would mean, that kind of thing is possible. So we launch an execution. And our Great Expectations validation solid ran alongside our other work here. And so you can see we have this sort of log viewer. Cool here is that in this little yielded expectation here, which you can see is like a structured event that was yielded from the solid, there's this expectations result metadata, and you can view that directly in line. So the thing that's really cool about this is if you have a very heterogeneous data pipeline that's like reading stuff in, doing some SQL work, writing some, running some Jupyter notebooks, writing plots out to Slack, and also running your expectation suite, you don't have to switch tools in order to view the results of the suite. And so that means if something went wrong somewhere else in your pipeline, you can quite easily go and like refer to the results of your great expectation suites. So we think that's a like really big win for self-service, and that it like really makes the sort of the value of writing the expectation suites very obvious, because it's super easy to plug these in next to the rest of the work that you're already orchestrating. And then you get all this nice, all these nice results for free. Just want to look at one other thing, which is, I've mentioned that there's this like run history. So what this lets you do is go back to previous runs of your pipelines. And again, you can go and see what the expectation results were for those pipeline runs. And so you get this longitudinal view of your data quality over time, which again, I think is like super valuable when you're trying to figure out what went wrong and you have a large heterogeneous pipeline that involves a bunch of different stuff, where otherwise you'd have to be switching between tools and stuff. So I can figure out. So, okay, so cool. So like I said, Dagster is a platform. This is one integration. And the thing that we think is like really nice about this framework is that it makes it really easy to hook things like Great Expectations together with a whole bunch of other tools. Like if you want to run Jupyter notebooks or DBT models or run Spark jobs in line, that's all very possible. And of course, you can run it on a whole bunch of different platforms, from the cloud platforms to Dask, we even cross-compile to Airflow. So this is quite a new integration, but we're quite excited to see what people do with it, and we're eager for contributions. I'm sure that we haven't anticipated all of the use cases that people are going to have. So I just want to underline that we love contributions, and thank you, and open it for questions.
Max, that demo just left everyone speechless. That is so beautiful. I mean, everything about the way that you handle authoring pipelines and just like the clarity, the conceptual clarity that Dagster brings, I think is a really, really good complement and benefit. I have a question for you. As people are writing pipelines in Dagster and iterating over different designs or iterations, how do you see the role of the creation of those kind of gold standard data sets that people were referencing earlier? Do you have some way of versioning data, or how do you all typically think about that in the Dagster workflow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think I think that we sort of like would like to see tests at every level. In a sense, we're very undogmatic software engineers because we really believe in all these different tools, but we also like really believe in testing and multi-layered testing. So I think, there are a bunch of test utilities that make it quite easy to run unit tests on individual solids and quite easy to test pipelines. Like I mentioned, all the heavyweight external context, like your Spark context, your connection to your warehouse, all that junk is easily swappable. And so we expect people to have sort of test setups where those resources are basically mocks and where you run full pipelines as part of your test suite. At least we built all the tools to kind of encourage that workflow. And also pipeline subsets. So it's quite natural to have a data set that represents what you expect to be seeing at some stage of your pipeline or as input to some pipeline, and have that be run in unit tests. And so I think expectation results are like a very reasonable thing to aggregate over those test runs. I think that maybe some of what we're doing in data test is some of it is a little bit Stockholm syndromed to like, you could never run your pipeline in test anyway. So what you have to do is you have to have like a perfect data set somewhere that you run against. And that feels like a little bit off to me. Sometimes you want like very, very, very small data sets to do unit testing with. Sometimes you want slightly larger things to do integration tests with, or to do like acceptance tests with. And we should be able to flexibly swap those things in and not feel like chained to like, oh, well, because we're running a big PySpark job, it needs the EMR cluster, so we can never run any tests. What we're trying to do is unchain those things. And I think that will have reverberating impacts on what people feel they need to do in like the data test specific. Does that answer this question?
It does. I think to me there's a really, I mean, I love the notion that you're sort of changing the way that people think about the workflow. I think of it a little bit in terms of the way that we discover the interesting test cases. I think of tests often as much as a form of documentation as anything else. So one of the things that that I think GE does well is turn your test into the same thing as the documentation that somebody sees. And with Dagster, you've done so much to keep the whole pipeline very well structured and to have very clear lineage of data as it moves through the system, that I think you get a very similar benefit in terms of describing conceptually exactly what's happening with a data set.
That's what we want to make it possible for people to do anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing, hi, by the way, I'm Nick. I'm the founder of Elemental. The one thing I'll also say is that, we really think that, I think just like Great Expectations is really thinking about the end-to-end developer workflow, where you're developing a notebook, you're figuring out how you should build the expectation suite and then deploy it. We also really think about the end-to-end workflow, but at a orchestrator level. And what that means is that the graph that we show, it is what Max was showing you is running on his laptop, not deployed anywhere. So the viewed graph in our development environment is purely a function of your checked in GitHub repo, So there was zero infrastructure requirements to load that. And that makes the graph this sort of documentation artifact. So that the moment that you check out a new repo, the first thing you do, you load it in Dagit, it's up there, and then you can kind of immediately get a ton of context on what's going on, instead of just having the DAG appear at a deployment time artifact. So it really changes your relationship with kind of your whole app in our view. And so I think it really aligns nicely with Great Expectations on that level, where you can kind of push more work farther up the dev lifecycle, while still being realistic about the way data pipelines work. In that, a lot of people might disagree that we're not dogmatic. I appreciate Max saying that, but one thing is that we're not we try to be realistic that you can't have everything up front. There's some things that can only be done in production, and that's why I think you need a unified tool set across the whole lifecycle.
I think it also just dovetails really well with what Madelon and Joost showed at the beginning in terms of the workflow where there's an interaction with the human who's submitting a data set that the author of the pipeline hasn't ever been able to see before, because potentially they're coming from this different opco. And they can put their expectations about that data set in a very clear way that gives them confidence that the pipeline is going to produce results that are going to be insightful to the user, but it also surfaces insights to the user immediately. And I see, I'm just imagining if that pipeline were to be built with Dagster, how much clarity the user could get about what the model is doing as well. So you again get to really enhance that notion of communication. Are there any other questions? All right, let me just then thank everybody for participating. This has been an absolute blast for me. Kyle, major thanks to you for organizing this event, getting people lined up to be able to present, and ensuring that we get everyone here. I always love how much I get to learn. Even if I've seen the presentation before, you learn something new every time, and so that makes it a joy for me. And I just love, I think, how much the way that people are thinking about these broader problems is evolving. Nick, I think I don't know if do we give you credit for coining the term data application?
I think like there's that book that there's like data intensive applications, that thing, but I feel like it's a neologism, but
I sure love the context that it brings with it, and I really see a lot of change in practice. I mean, I love the idea, Hamel, of having this, and Taylor of having an action, really bringing data into the CI/CD process, and of course the Joost, your and Madelon's presentation, I just feel like exemplifies the spirit of GE, or at least that you're so analogous to where I was when I was thinking about, gee, I want GE, right? Being in the exact same position.
Yeah, it's like we're all
team.
building our own implementation of it, right? So yeah.
So anyway, fantastic community discussion. Thank you, everyone. Let's wrap it up here, but let me just one more time flag for you in the chat. There's that link that Kyle posted, so you could click through, sign up there if you'd like to present at one of these community forums in the future. You just posted it again, and look forward to seeing people next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks everyone.